Welcome to the Digital Insurance Agent Podcast. I'm so glad you've chosen to join us today. And with me is Mitchell Weisburgh, and we're so glad you have chosen to join us. Mitch, thanks for dropping in today, and glad to have you here.
Carl, thank you so much for having me, and I hope what we talk about that your listeners find interesting.
Fantastic. So, we're going to get into some leadership discussion today. But before we do that, give us a little of your story and kind of tune our audience into who you are, and we'll get started.
So I've started, I guess, four or five different businesses. My first business I grew to about $10 million. We had about 130 employees, and then that was in the 1980s and 1990s, and then other businesses more in the education market. And I guess going around 2017, it just dawned on me like we're facing all these issues as a society, and I see people not listening to each other and scrolling instead of looking around, and everybody seems like fearful and miserable, and it's like, you know something, that's not our natural state. And so I started doing some research, and at the same time, I got this email from a university saying, "Could you talk to technology about our undergraduates?" And I'm like, you know something, I'm not interested in talking about technology. Why don't I talk to your undergraduates about how successful people deal with failure, deal with people who get in their way, um, and give them the mindsets so that they can be successful in life. And so we agreed that I would teach a 2-day workshop for, college students. And it's just like, and I'm thinking like, well, that's what all entrepreneurs do is like, right, we all see these problems, right? And then we all think, oh, I know how to solve the problem. And then we agreed with somebody like, we're going to do this for you. This is how much it's going to cost. This is when I'm going to do it. And then we shake hands or we sign the contract or whatever. And then it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this, right? So that's what happened to me is I had 5 months to put this together. And so I read 10, 11 different books, and each book had its own slice, but I tried to put them together into one way of communicating to college students at the time. Went out to the college, taught this 2-day workshop, and at the end of the 2-day workshop, I'm like, and that's mind shifting. And 65 kids stood up and cheered. And that's when I knew that this is not something that we teach people. And really, when I started the journey, I didn't know all these techniques myself either, you know, but once you know them, you can't unsee them. And things that used to get you upset don't get you upset anymore. Think problems that used to be unsurmountable. It's like, oh my gosh, maybe that wasn't so important, or oh my gosh, I can't solve these. And so you learn how to deploy these mindsets yourself so that you're solving problems, or when you do get into these states, these mindsets where like you're fighting, or you're angry at yourself, you can recover a lot faster, and you don't have to be stay angry for a week or a month. It's like, oh, in one day you can be, oh, if that it really didn't make that much difference, or I this is what I learned from it. So I've learned a lot for myself, and I'm really gratified when I see the people that I teach, and they report back to me like, oh geez, I've had this problem with my spouse for so many years, or I've had this problem growing my business, and I never thought I could do this. And I learned that I can tap into my own resourcefulness, and I can lead people, I can manage people, I can move forward. So that it's really enjoyable when you hear that from people.
That's good. And we're gonna, for our audience, we're gonna really dive into this topic of breaking the invisible ceiling, is what we entitled this. But how to take a leadership beyond survival mode. And so, what we are going to get into in the beginnings here is that there is this trap that most leaders fall into, and it's a survival mode trap. And one of the things you talk about, Mitch, is the five responses that kick in during survival mode. And
Yep.
you've brushed into that here into the introduction, but dig into that a little more. What does happen when we go into survival mode? What are the natural responses, and how do those just show up in the day-to-day life of an insurance agency owner when they just encounter different events that we all encounter in life as entrepreneurs?
So I think I'd like to build a little bit of background first, and that is to understand the two different ways that our brains make decisions. Because when we're in survival mode, we're using one part of our brain, and that's the part, I call it the survival brain, the reptilian brain. Um, the limbic system is another phrase for it. But that part of the brain developed in the earliest animals that could possibly move, and it's primarily geared towards the survival of the animal. And if you think about it, when we're faced with a danger that could threaten our lives, we have to be able to react quickly. That means we have to be able to take in information from our senses really quickly. Even if we don't have all the information that ideally we would have, we have to come up with what we're going to do, and then we have to do it. And we have to focus our entire organism on that. That part of the brain makes decisions like that in fractions of a second. It wakes up in like 2/100ths of a second. And when that part of the brain makes a decision, it's, there's fight. Okay, something happened. Somebody says something to us. Our survival instinct is to fight back. Flight is to run away, to deal with it some other time. Freeze is like deer in headlights, like, or an animal just stopping and not doing anything, and maybe the problem will go away. Maybe it won't see you. Um, and those are the first three. And then, as we, if you're running an independent agency, it's probably because you were really good at sales yourself, right? And so you became better and better at doing something. And that fourth capability of the limbic mind is the things that you do well, that you don't even have to think about. When somebody gives you an objection, you know how to meet the objection. So relying on your habits is the fourth thing, and the fifth thing is really going along with the crowd. And if we're in sales, we're dealing with that all the time, right? Where we bring something up to somebody, and and we naturally want to please them, and they say, but can you do this? It's like, yeah, I can throw that in. Well, can you do this? Yeah, I can throw that in. Well, can you reduce the price? I can't reduce it by that much, but maybe I can reduce it a little bit to make you happier. And so we 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 what we're trying to do is we're trying to go along with what other people are expecting us, what we predicted that they want us to do. And so those are the five different aspects of the survival brain. Once once we've come up with an action, whether it was because a fighting, fleeing, freezing, something that we're good at, or something that we're doing in order to please others, once we've come up with that, when that gets challenged, whether it gets challenged by ourselves or by another person, then the brain is also evaluated and then says, oh, that's a threat. Somebody's threatening something we've already decided. I'm going to double down on that. And so again, the limbic system floods our brain with stress hormones and cortisol and adrenaline, and we just focus in, and that's where we really go into fight or flight mode, because we're just like, we can't be proven wrong. We can't be made wrong. Now, that limbic system. Now, when we think of the things that we want to do, we want to come up with creative solutions. We want to look at information and analyze it and come up with the best things to do. We want to avoid mistakes. We want to empathize with people. We want to do the things that are most important. Those are things that are decided by our newer parts of the brain, which it's the prefrontal cortex. Um, and and when we're in that mode where we're really flexible and resourceful, we're able to take in new information. We're able to come up with new things to do, and we're able to analyze. But if our survival brains have made a decision based on habits or fear or going along with the crowd, or something like that, and our and our prefrontal cortex starts coming up with other things that we can do, what naturally happens is the survival brain says, you're not allowed to do that. I'm giving you a jolt of cortisol and adrenaline to kind of limit you and focus you on what I've already decided to do. And so we're not capable of taking in new information. We're not capable of listening to other people. We're not capable of coming up with new actions to do. Um, we're not capable of regulating our emotions because we're being flooded by these fear hormones. And so getting out of survival mode means to be, how do you get out of these five different types of things that we do when we're reacting to situations so that we could reevaluate them and come up with things that really align to what our values are and what our biggest goals are.
That's good. So, how could a is it? Let me ask you this: is it possible for a person to be stuck in survival mode without even realizing it?
Well, most of us go through life like that most of the time.
Okay.
And I, and even, I've studied this now for and been teaching it for 7 or 8 years. Me too. It's like all of a sudden I'll realize I just did that from, a guy cuts me off when I'm driving and I get angry and I yell at him and it's like, he's not going to care that I just yelled at him. Or if he does, maybe he'll get out of his car with a gun and shoot me or something, like that's stupid. Um, but we're all doing these things without realizing it, that the ability to think about how we're thinking is one of the most powerful tools that we can have. So it's self-awareness, or you can call it metacognition, but to be able to think about ourselves, something, I'm just doing something because I've always done it that way. I'm just doing something because I'm really good. I'm just doing something because I'm angry. That's really the first step in moving from survival mode into resourceful mode.
Okay. So that brings us to really our next question. What are some practical steps then that our listeners can take to start to calm that mental noise and regain access to their critical thinking and their emotional
Mhm.
regulation?
Well, in general, there's really four different ways. Okay. And that first way is just to becoming aware that you were in survival mode. And sometimes that's enough. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just doing this because I've always done it this way. Or I'm angry, something, but I don't have to be angry. It's really not that important. Um, and so being self-aware may in and of itself be enough. The second step is positive self-talk. Now, you know, positive self-talk where we're urging ourselves on, like, I just got to do this harder, or I can't believe I'm so stupid. Why am I getting so angry? I have to stop being angry, and you're just getting yourself more and more limbic when you're doing that. The positive self-talk is self-talk that opens us up. So the positive self-talk are things like, gee, what would make this fun? Or, gee, something, I've been in tough situations before, and every one of them I've come through. Something, this is just another tough situation, and I can do it again. I'm okay with that. Or, uh, I guess, something we're disagreeing. Something. What if this person is 10% right? Maybe, what if they're seeing something that I didn't see before? So sometimes that positive self-talk that opens us up will then quiet our limbic system so that we are more open and we are more resourceful. And then the third thing is some type of distraction, because sometimes that limbic system is, it just needs to calm down first. And so meditation, or mindfulness, or taking a walk, or getting some exercise, um, or listening to music, or if you're drawing, but something that you find enjoyable, that then takes your mind off of what it was upset about, can calm your mind so that you can then use your opening questions to find out what you really want. Those are the three things that we can do by ourselves. Sometimes whatever is getting us upset or locking us in, even knowing some of those techniques, it's just not enough. And so sometimes, if there's somebody else that we trust that knows some of these techniques, sometimes another person can walk you through. It could be a spouse, it could be a friend, it could be a therapist. Um, And I actually find this every once in a while myself. I just get really upset, or really down on myself for something. And the two people that I tend to talk to are my kids, who are adults now. They're in their 30s. But I'll give them a call and say, I'm just feeling absolutely stuck. I know this is a problem. I don't know what to do. And, inevitably, they're like, Daddy, you wrote the book on this. Come on. It's like, I just can't do this. Okay, fine. I'm going to open up the book and I'm going to go through some of the techniques with you. And they'll just go, walk me through it. I just needed somebody else who knew the same terminology, who could then just get me to focus on my breath for 15 minutes, or think about something that I did that I really liked, or get me to go out for a walk or something. And there's going to be times where it's something even more serious, where a knowledgeable friend isn't going to be just good enough. Like maybe you really do need a therapist. But there's the three techniques that we can do for ourselves, which is self-awareness, positive self-talk that opens us up, or some type of distraction like meditation or taking a walk. Finding somebody else who can help us, and hopefully it's a close friend or relative or somebody that we know. And then if we need something even larger than that, some type of therapist.
Good. Now, you challenge the idea that there's always a single right answer. Why is that mindset dangerous? And especially when you're leading a team of people?
Yeah, we as people, again, this is really part of the limbic reaction. The limbic mind works to in binary, and something is either right or it's wrong, and there's nothing in between. And so when we look at problems or we look at opportunities, our limbic mind, which is so much faster than our prefrontal cortex, it's 2/100ths of a second versus 2 to 3 seconds. You know, it comes up with what it thinks is the right thing to do, and then our prefrontal cortex, our resourceful mind, just basically um, choruses that. But when you learn to be flexible in looking at different types of situations, there are clearly some situations where there is one answer. I'm thirsty right now. Oh, look, I have a glass of water. I'm no longer thirsty. Okay. But there are an awful lot of situations where we need more data. We need to do some analysis. Maybe we need an expert. And in most of those types of situations, there's more than one thing that's going to work. And there are trade-offs, but clearly, you look at cars, there's what, I don't know, 20, 30 different car manufacturers. Like there's trade-offs between all those different cars, but all those cars work. You either plug them into the electricity, you put gasoline in them or diesel or whatever. You start it up and it drives. It can go 30 miles an hour, it can go 55 miles an hour. Some of them are more expensive, some of them are less expensive. So to be able to look at situations and realize, something, there's more than one solution, that's going to stop a lot of the fights about my way is right, your way is wrong. No, my way is right, your way is wrong. It becomes much more, something, maybe either one of these could work, and maybe we could come up with something that's better than either one of those. And then if we also look at other types of situations where it's something that's new, and really nobody could predict uh, what's going to work. Like somebody wants a new type of coverage for a disaster, a disaster or something that you've never encountered before. N- Nobody really knows the answer, so it's like, well, something. Let me come up with a couple possibilities that aren't going to really hurt me in the long run, and let's see what we do. People are so complex. So you have a salesperson who says, I'm having really a hard time selling an insurance policy to this person. Like, you can give the person a suggestion, but you don't really know that that suggestion is going to work. Okay. But to come up with, something, let's come up with a couple things that we could try, and let's now see if we could simulate that person and see how that person might react to them. You're in a much more um, complex problem solving mode, where you're actually trying things out and looking forward and trying to figure out what the feedback that you're getting, what you could do next. And so So it's really dangerous if a person comes to you and says, "I'm having trouble selling this person," and you're thinking, "Okay, well, the right way of dealing with this is so and so," and if you discount it, that means that you're not a good salesperson. It's like, well, you don't know that's true. Maybe that client really did need a discount of some type. Maybe um, maybe they had a different type of problem than the salesperson fully understood. Maybe you misunderstood the salesperson. So to be able to look and say, well, something is this a situation where there really is one right answer and everything else is wrong? Is this a situation where there could be multiple right answers and or maybe we need to get some more information or some expertise? Or is this a situation that's nobody could predict? And so how can we simulate it? How could we try something else so that we could get some feedback and figure out what's going to work?
Excellent. So this is really a kind of a test and learn approach that you're kind of laying out here. Test and
Mhm.
learn, let the data guide you in that process.
Exactly. And really, you think about the test and learn, that's how we all learn pretty much everything, right? I mean, we
Mhm.
learned how to sell. That we may have taken courses in how to sell, but we learned how to sell by trying to bring up questions, trying to close, figuring out what things tended to work. But what your closing statement is for one customer is very going to be very different from your closing statement from another customer. And so you learn how to do this give and take. You try one possible close, and if that doesn't work, you find out what the objections are, and then you try something else, right?
Excellent. Now, you mentioned the dangers of leader manufacturing urgency. Um, how do you know when you're reacting to manufactured urgency versus real business needs?
Um, well, that's a really interesting question. I think one of the things very often when we're think something is urgent, it's because somebody has told us it's urgent. And so one of the things that when somebody says that we have to do this, that this has to be done in a certain time frame, that triggers our limbic parts of the brain. And so we get locked into, okay, we have to follow them or we have to fight them. And so just questioning like, well, wait a minute, I'm hearing that this is an urgent issue, but is it real? Is it really? Is this just one of the things that, if I don't do anything in it's not going to in 2 weeks I'm not going to really care, okay? Is this something that we have some time to do some analysis before we have to come up with a decision? So I think just being aware that that people tend to manipulate us by making us feel that something is urgent, and and reevaluating and say, well, is this really urgent? Is this really that important that it has to be done? What would happen if we did give it another week or 2 weeks or whatever, and did some analysis first? I think that's um, that's one thing that we can do, and then the other thing to do is to like, okay, I understand that this might be urgent, but you know something, I'm gonna take a walk. I'm not gonna make a decision right now. I'm gonna make a decision overnight, and I hope you can live with that. You know?
Good. Now, as your agency grows, your team grows, a lot of agents are going to struggle with delegation and influence. So, how do they make the shift from managing people to actually collaborating effectively?
Well, is one of the obstacles that we all face, as we grow our businesses and we bring on people, is that there's so many of the things that we just know how to do. And so the tendency is when somebody brings us a problem and like we know exactly what they should do and we tell them, but then that conditions them to come to you the next time, right? So part of it is to think, what's really important here. They're coming to me with a problem, and I could give them an answer, but how do I push it back on them, like, um, so that they're coming to me having actually tried to come up with an answer and try to learn. Another thing to keep in mind is like if they did this the way they think that they should do it, and it didn't work, is that going to really, really hurt us, or is that going to really hurt them? Or is it just going to hurt a little bit and they're going to learn the law of natural consequences so they'll really know not to do it that way again? And to, think through like long term, if they make this mistake, is this going to be a net positive or a net negative, even though in the short term it might be a net negative? And so those are two possible techniques to think about.
Okay. And well, that kind of brings in this next question. So, for an agency owner who's used to being right, quote unquote, how can they build that culture where multiple solutions are explored so that team members do feel like they're being heard?
Well, so that's something that's really difficult to do when you're the leader, okay? Because everybody is looking at you to make the decision. And so one of the things that's really hard is to encourage the discussion before you come up with whatever it is that you're going to say. And so resisting that urge, um, maybe make a game out of it and say, something, we're going to have a meeting, we're going to be discussing uh, this issue that the agency is facing. I think that we should do this. I'm going to see if I can hold off for 15 minutes before suggesting something. Okay. Um, another thing is one of the ways to cut off thinking from other people is the yes but reaction. So the person brings something up and you say yes, but, and then that yes is completely forgotten because what they know is you're about to disagree with them. So a technique that you might use, it's either, some people call it the yes and technique, other people call it the what I like about that technique, is the person comes up with something and then your response is, what I like about that, and you've got to find something about what they just said that you like about it. And then you say, and something, it prompts me to think about, and then you add something to it, and you throw it back and say, what do you think about that? And so that's another way to encourage, the free flowing ideas within the organization. And then a third thing, and the data shows that organizations make much better decisions when they evaluate three or four, three or more possible options. And yet, most decisions in organizations are made based on just one item. So a person comes to you and says, I have this issue. And I think I'm doing this. And one of the things that you can do, even if you like the idea, and especially if you don't like the idea, is to come back and say, something, that's a really interesting idea. Why don't you come back to me in an hour and give me three possible things that you can do and why you think the other two things are wrong. And so you get this other person to come up with three possible things, and that starts conditioning them to start thinking about multiple ways of doing things themselves. And inevitably, what happens is, the first idea gives them some information. When they come up with the second idea, they start seeing some holes in the first idea. When they come up with the third idea, they start seeing some holes in both of them, and they may come up with something that's not one of the three ideas, but uses some elements of all three. And so it gets them to really think about a problem more deeply.
That's a good suggestion there. So, now, in your experience, what usually causes this invisible ceiling that often limits an entrepreneur's growth?
Well, I think that what we all fall into is we fall into doing the things that we know how to do well. And then without even realizing it, when those get challenged, we get flooded by the stress hormones, we then double down on those things. And it's very human to have these cognitive biases. It's a lot of experiments have shown that when we know something to be true, we are not able to take in information that contradicts what we know that is true, even if the information is sitting right in front of us. And we see this in politics all the time, right? In with either side, the information comes in, they're clearly showing that they're wrong, and yet they're not seeing the information. It's like, well, it's not coming from a good source. It's not accurate. It's wrong. They don't see it or whatever. We all do that in business as well. So so when we're aware that we have these cognitive biases, one of the things that we can do is to with this self-awareness, anytime we're sure of something, to understand that being sure is going to limit us and we're not going to consider other alternatives. And so there's tricks that we can play with our own brain. It's like, well, I know that I should be doing this. If all of a sudden I absolutely knew that I couldn't do that, what else, what would I do instead? And so that question alone might open us up to another
Mm,
possibility. That thing about you know, I believe that we could do this, but you know something, I should have three alternatives. Let me come up with two other things that I could do. Um, just saying to ourselves, you know something, what, you know, if you're talking with another person, um, you know, I clearly think that they're wrong, but they're not stupid. So maybe they're seeing something that I don't see, and they might be 90% wrong. But let me just ask them some questions to find out how they came to that conclusion, and find out how they're maybe only 90% wrong, and maybe I'm only 80% right. Maybe I'm not 100% right. And so questions like that could open us up to, you know, be so that we're no longer so sure of things, that we're not seeing the evidence that's right in front of us.
that's valuable insight right there. So, can you share an example, maybe from your own experiences, Mitch, people you've worked with, of somebody who has been able to clear through that ceiling by applying some of these mind shifting principles?
Uh, so you know, it happens to me all the time. I think so. Here's an example. It's not a work example, but it, you know, on the spot, it's the first thing that I could come up with. It's a travel example. Um, so we were traveling a few years ago. My mother-in-law had had a stroke. This was going to be her first travel after the stroke. Our daughter was living in Milwaukee. All my sisters and their families were going to Milwaukee to celebrate July 4th. Milwaukee has a big party on July 3rd, so we were flying out the afternoon of July 3rd. My son's birthday is July 3rd. He was flying out with us. On the way to the airport, I get a text on my phone saying your flight is canceled. And we have, you know, this was like a Thursday morning. We have booked you on a flight Monday morning. It's like you're booking me on a flight after I've already returned, would should have returned. It's like, come on, you know. And of course, you know, you can imagine the anger, right? And it's like we have the whole family there. It's my mother-in-law's first time out. It's my son's birthday. You know, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind, you know. Um, and it's like, so, and then all of a sudden it's like, you know something, these are all limbic reactions. Let me just see, you know, so where am I right now? Well, you know, it's noon, July 3rd. It's my son's birthday. A bunch of us are together. What's the best thing that could happen right now? And what popped into my mind was the best thing that could happen right now is let's have a July 3rd birthday party. And it's like, okay. And from that point on, it's like, okay, you know, one of us, um, work with the airline to cancel the flights. One of us work with the hotel to cancel the flights. One of us, in you know, including my son, you know, call people who you want at your birthday party. One of us plan the menu, figuring out what food we need. And you know, we turned that situation around. We never got out to Milwaukee, but we all got together at home. We had a feast. You know, everybody was festive, and so that's an example of turning things around, realizing, oh my gosh, I'm in limbic, but you know, from this situation where I am now, what's something that would be fun that could happen? Oh, we could have a party, or what's something we could learn from this, or what am I going to do to reward myself? This didn't work out, but what's the reward that I could give myself for at least trying? So you know, that was an example.
Excellent. So, as we kind of bring this to a close, you've got a mission to put this skill set in the hands of 5 million people. What's your best advice for our listeners who want to start applying this today? What's the first step?
Well, the first step I think is to realize that sometimes you're in limbic mode and sometimes other people are in limbic mode, and that's very human. And that doesn't make us, bad people. It doesn't make us incompetent. And to realize that even not realizing that you've been in limbic mode most of the time, there are times where you've overcome that. There are times where you face challenges and think back, the times where the things that you're most proud of, where you doubted that you could do something, where people were telling you that you couldn't, and you did it anyhow, and use that as fuel for all the times where you start doubting yourself or you feel yourself in limbic and it's like and you start getting angry at yourself, you start getting angry at other people. It's like, no, wait a minute, something. I've felt this way before. I've overcome it. I've been successful, and I can do it again. And so that would be my advice: is to keep those things in mind when we start getting down on ourselves.
Excellent. And Mitch, where can people go to learn more about your work and connect with you and connect with some of your resources?
Sure. Well, my website is mindshiftingwithmitch.com. As we're talking today, the first book is out, which is on how to access the resourceful parts of your brain. And from my website, I'll give you the link to buy the book. The second book is coming out in November. And that book will be on how to work with other people, even though you disagree with them or may not like them or they're getting in your way. That's on conflict and collaboration. I have a newsletter which you could sign up for by going to the website. And there's also a way to contact me. I teach some live courses. If there's agents that would like me to speak to a group of people, they can contact me from the website, and I can arrange by Zoom like we did, or theoretically, travel in order to speak to people about this. Anything that I can do to help people become more resourceful, I think it's going to make us all happier, all more successful, and really allow us to work on some of these issues that we all, feel in our hearts like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? We're going to be able to start working through them.
Fantastic. Mitch, this has been a great conversation and just some really practical, advice for leaders out there and not to get trapped
Right.
in this,
Yeah.
state of flight or fight and these limbic responses, but to really back up and look at things differently. So I appreciate you sharing this with us and joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me on, and I hope that this helps, the independent agents, continue their work, helping other people, protect themselves from disasters, because what you're doing is really important.
Fantastic. And our audience, thanks for tuning in to the Digital Insurance Agent Podcast. We're glad you've joined us today, and we look forward to having you tune in for our next episode.